We refer to Ben-Gurion as a timeless leader because he visioned the Jewish history in timeless terms. Okay? He was part of the chain towards achieving the Jewish destiny. And the Jewish destiny after 2,000 years of exile is a Jewish state. Take a look at the Israeli society's resilience in the two wars of independence. It's a term that we can use it right now. We are amidst the second war of independence. Why should we regard it as the war of independence? Because as an Israeli, not as an historian, I feel that we fight for our survival for the second time. It's not a war of choice. This is a war that we should win in order to survive. David Ben-Gurion said on April 1948, "The road ahead remained difficult and dangerous. The pride and satisfaction felt by every Jew in the world for the conquest and victories of our defense forces must not overshadow the harsh military and political challenges that await us. We must not overlook the internal deficiencies, organizational, moral, financial, and others, that are occasionally revealed among us. Even greater efforts will be required of us." On September 1948, Ben-Gurion said, "Jewish volunteers from across the diaspora have come to fight alongside us, and the efforts of the Jewish people have enabled us to overcome dangers we could not have faced alone. We trust that the strength and resilience of Israel will prevail, just as it had before. Our army remains strong, capable of delivering crushing blows to our enemies. But our ultimate goal is peace. Peace with honor, peace with stability." Ben-Gurion, on the one hand, he was the homos politicus. He knew how to push aside his political opponents. On the other hand, he was above politics. When you read his speech, there is no schism within the Israeli people. There's the entire Jewish people, there's the entire Zionist movement, there is the entire Tzur Israel. People from the Yishuv, people from the front lines, soldiers, men, women, Jewish diaspora, Eretz Israeli Yeshuv, everyone took part in this effort. We all know that many didn't, but those who did, they were part of Tzur Israel. And I think that this is Ben-Gurion for today. What made Ben-Gurion a leader beyond time is the understanding or the belief that Jewish unity is the essence for Jewish resilience. He was a leader that tried to unify all the Jewish world, Zionist movement, Israeli society towards resilient society that will become almost everything. And when you think about Jewish unity, this is what happened in September 1948. He recalled the establishment of the State of Israel, where you had to convince the leaders of the entire world to recognize the newborn State of Israel, and that wouldn't have been done without the world Jewry. When you think about the war that we are confronting with, the war today is a war that Israeli society is a united society. There's bonding that is unbreakable, a bonding of Jews within Israel, outside of Israel, that knows that the only way to prevail is to be united. So if we apply Ben-Gurion's vision or timeless Ben-Gurion to our days, I think that people of Israel, in the broader extent, not only the people of the State of Israel, but the people of Israel, the Jewish people, should avoid any single moment of time. This is only background noise We should focus on the mission. We should focus on a goal. We should focus on winning this war in order to achieve peace. And any other pressure, we should take the Ben-Gurionic vision of don't rely on the single moment in time and try to think about the greater goal, the Jewish destiny, the destiny of the State of Israel, and then to take the correct or the right decision that corresponds with the present checkmate game that we are playing right now.
We encourage you to explore the Ben-Gurion Archives website, where you can discover the enduring wisdom and strength of one of Israel's greatest leaders. Use the on-screen QR code or visit the Archives website at www.bengurionarchive.bgu.ac.il/en and let the legacy of Ben-Gurion guide and inspire you.
Welcome. I'm Doug Sesserman. I'm privileged to serve as the CEO of Americans for Ben-Gurion University, and this is our third annual Ben-Gurion Day in the USA program. Today we feature Professor Paula Caballo in a conversation that will be part of our live program, in addition to the video you just saw. I'm speaking to you from my virtual office here in New York City, and Paula is live. It's a little after 7 p.m. in Israel. Welcome, Paula.
Hi, Doug.
So great to see you. Before we get started, I just want to thank first the Ben-Gurion Heritage Institute for partnering with us on this important program, and also for I just received an update, the 142 partner organizations around the United States, many congregations, synagogues, JCCs, federations, day schools, Hebrew schools that all participated with us in this Ben-Gurion Day USA program. Our goal here is really simple. There's a wonderful holiday that commemorates Ben-Gurion's legacy in Israel called Ben-Gurion Day. It's celebrated annually on his yurtzeit. And our job here at Americans for Ben-Gurion University is to simply bring that holiday to the United States of America. So we're so thankful for the opportunity to do that. We had more than 1,245, I think 1,257 registrants for the program. I just got a text. That means our participation increased by 80% year on year. And if we keep up this momentum, someday in the United States, Ben-Gurion Day will be as big as it is in Israel, or maybe close. Anyway, we're so glad for all of you to join us. I want to begin the program by just thanking the leadership of our committee, Lisa Douglas Perlmutter from the Bay Area and Seth Harlem from Boca Raton, Florida. I also want to thank Denise Lahat, who is helping us administratively produce everything from Israel, and my incredible staff who work so hard behind the scenes to make everything possible. In particular, Rachel Moroff, Sissy Zoller, Lenore Levine, and Tally Goldshaft, who runs all of our marketing efforts. So as I mentioned, today is about commemorating David Ben-Gurion, who I fondly refer to sometimes as the number 2 Jew all time. After all, you have to give number 1 to Moses. But here we are, 14 months and a day after October 7th, 2023. And it's a time when we probably need to hearken the feelings, ideas, resilience of Ben-Gurion like maybe never before. And I don't think there's a person on the planet who's more qualified to help us understand Ben-Gurion and how his insights might be able to help us today. Sometimes Paula refers to Ben-Gurion as both a prophet and a therapist. So let's talk a little bit about Paula Caballo. She is just amazing. I'm proud to call her a friend. She's also the head of the Israeli Center for Israel Studies at Ben-Gurion University. She is the former director of the Ben-Gurion Research Institute for the Study of Israel and Zionism, and her most recent book, Israel Community Action, Living Through the War of Independence, was awarded the Association of Israel Studies Shapiro Prize for 2020. Her research focus is on the history of Israel studies and the relationship between communities in Israel and civil society, and Ben-Gurion, how he interacted with various strata within Israel's society. Her current research portraits patterns of community resilience, community action in Israel's urban neighborhoods during the 60s and 70s. And together with Dr. Hila Shalem Baharad, Paula is co-authoring a book on the relationship between Israel's new migrants and the founding father himself. Paula did her undergraduate and master's work at Ben-Gurion University. She then went to get her PhD at Tel Aviv University before doing her postdoctorate work in the United States. She was a Johns Hopkins Philanthropy Fellow a few years ago. She was also a Schusterman Visiting Professor in Israel Studies at Boston University. And during the spring of 2022, she was on sabbatical as a visiting professor at UC Berkeley's Helen Diller Institute for Jewish Law and Israel Studies. Welcome, Paula, to the Ben-Gurion Day in the USA program.
Good to be here, Doug.
So let's start. I know you wanted to share with the audience a letter that you discovered. So why don't we start there and then go. By the way, this is a quick message to the audience. If you do want to ask a question during the program, just click on the Q&A function. We'll record your question and do our best to get most of those questions to Paula throughout the conversation and also at the end. Go ahead, Paula.
So I guess we were thinking, Doug, which would be the documents that we want to share with the audience today. There's so many documents to share, and of course we could go back to 48 like Adi did, and of course naturally when thinking of October 7th, we mostly think about 1948. But I had this moment during the month after October 7th. We were working with a group that was uprooted from the Western Negev. We were offering them, I guess, a learning experience. They were relocated to Mitzpe Ramon, which is not far from here, and we were offering them an opportunity to do some learning and reflection on what they were going through. And in one of the occasions, they asked to go down to the archives. And then I was thinking, okay, what should we look at in the archives? And I was thinking, let's go back to March 1957, because then that was Israel's first withdrawal from Gaza, the Gaza Strip. It was after the 1956 war. And the letter is what Ben-Gurion writes to the settlers, the pioneers of the Western Negev in March 7, 1957. And I think Denise is supposed to, yeah, thank you. Okay, so before the letter, okay. So these are the people. So we went down to the archives with a group, and they didn't know. I mean, I hardly knew what I was going to find. It was kind of an experiment. We went down and said, let's see what we can find about how Ben-Gurion dealt with the Gaza withdrawal in 1957. So we're standing there and surrounded by these papers and boxes, and pulling out one of the boxes. And then this is what we found. So now the letter itself, let's see. Are we supposed to see it on the screen, the letter, or should I read from it? Or this is, Okay, for those
You
of
can
you
go
who...
ahead and read from it. I believe
Okay,
we do have a copy we'll share on the screen.
okay. So the letter is in Hebrew, but it's translated into English for you guys, thanks to our dear translator, Naftali Greenwood. So he writes a letter to the people who live in the Western Negev, and he writes them the following: Dear friends, I realize that I must approach you and explain especially why I advised the government to surrender the Gaza Strip to a UN force. This is March 7, 1957. Because I am not oblivious to the concerns and perhaps the anxieties that this will awaken in your hearts, not without ample reason. It has been 4 months now, the first time after your localities in the south were founded, that you were able to head into the fields of placidity to work and sleep calmly in your beds at night. And you are not sure, nor am I sure, that this tranquility is yours even now. In other words, he is admitting that his decision to withdraw the forces, the IDF, from Gaza is going to affect them directly, their lives directly, their sense of security. And he admits that only in the 4 months after Israel conquered, the IDF conquered Gaza in the Sinai campaign, it was only those 4 months in which they could sleep full night. So he actually admits that he's going to do something that is against the well-being of those people. And then he goes on to explain why he had to do it anyhow. And I think that while reading the letter is very important because it has at least 2 layers. One layer is to read to understand how Ben-Gurion explains directly, bluntly, explains why he had to do it. And the other level is the sensitivity and I would say the frankness in which he was willing to admit that he's taken a decision that might be against their well-being, their direct well-being. So I think there's the 2 levels are, it's this I would say this ambivalence in his personality to be able to do something that is has a price, and at the same time to be compassionate to the people and address them directly. And I will only add, and then I will we will continue our conversation, but I will only add that in the explanation that he gives them, he provides information that he didn't even provide in the Knesset in his speech. So in a way, he trusts them not to publish that information openly. And he tells them that he was afraid that Israel will be avoided from receiving some military aid that it needed for its survival, and that the international sanctions will ban Israel from achieving those means that she needs for its survival. So this is not something he says in the speech in the Knesset, but he does write to the people that live there. The people that were standing there in the archives and reading that Ben-Gurion says, I understand that now you have had a few days of sleep. I can tell you that it was a moment that people were crying around that table. They understood exactly what he was talking about.
Did it give them a sense of comfort in a way, or more upset?
It's interesting. These are people that have a pro-Ben-Gurion sentiment, a very deep one. So it did open a discussion. I mean, it was the beginning of the war, so it wasn't even on the table, the discussion whether, Israel has to stay or not stay. It was very early in the war, and some of the people did raise thoughts that, here we go again. This is something that, by the way, I've been I have been showing this letter to various visitors since then. And one of the most common responses is, oh, history repeats itself, and here we
Yeah.
go again. But interestingly enough, it did not raise.
Yes, strangely enough, if I'm doing the math right, 1957 to 2024 is 67 years.
Yeah.
67 being a very important year.
The interesting thing is that I did not find in the various occasions where I presented this letter, and we go back in history in the tunnel, in the history path back and see how that dilemma was there all the time, because it was there before, it was there after, it has been with us always. I'm talking about the Gaza Strip and the complexities of the geography there. It's very complex, and so it has been on the table, on Ben-Gurion's table, more than once, I would say. And interestingly enough, most people who are exposed to it don't respond in, I would say, discomfort or anger about Ben-Gurion. Most people have I feel that there's appreciation of the fact that he shares the dilemma of a leader with the people.
Yeah. Wow. So let's start just for a moment. I just wanted to highlight that more than 60% of our audience today is brand new to us. So they're not really that familiar with the university and our 3 campuses in Beersheba, Sde Boker, and Eilat. You're speaking to us from our Sde Boker campus where you work and also live at the Midrashah. And you showed a picture of our archives, the Ben-Gurion archives, which are recently renovated. We have a brand new building thanks to the generosity of Max and Cindy Mintzberg from Canada, wonderful couple. Could you maybe tell the audience a little bit about that new building, what we sometimes refer to as Israel's Presidential Library, and what it means to you and the research?
Oh, it's amazing. It's that you remember the old building, right? The old building was an improvised building. It was a typical Israeli, the building was built for another purpose. Never mind, we will adjust it for the Ben-Gurion Research Institute. We don't have a real archive. Never mind, we'll take the bomb shelter and make it into the archives. And we managed with that for a few decades. But since we have the new building, it's a whole new experience. First of all, because the archives have a real home. And now it's a certified home, meaning that the conditions are such that we could actually bring the original documents. And we constantly find treasures there. I mean, all the time, we find more and more. I don't know, I'll give just one example. A short time after we moved into the new building, we gave a seminar to the to faculty from the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, and the staff came, okay, for the seminar. And one of the staff happens to be the son of Chaim Israeli. Chaim Israeli was Ben-Gurion's personal assistant in the Minister of Defense, and he was I would say, the person that he trusted more than anyone else. And he gave him the responsibility to guard his archives and to make sure that the archives arrive in Sde Boker. So Oded Israeli, his son, Professor Oded Israeli from the Department of Jewish Thought, arrives that day, and he says to Adi, I brought some boxes that I found in my father's house. And Adi's, I want to put them, I want to store them in the archive. So Adi opens the luggage, that part of the car that I don't know in English. We call it bagage. I don't know the words probably. He opens it, he sees a box, and he opens the box, and he actually finds one of a whole set of booklets, tiny booklets that Ben-Gurion had in his pocket, where he wrote in tiny words, notes, but minimum notes, And the son is there, and he opens the box and he closes it immediately because he can't believe that treasure is actually with us. And then when they took it down to the archives, that was the little pocket booklet where Ben-Gurion wrote the notes after 181 resolution. That's something we had only the copy of it. We had later versions of that. We didn't have the original. And that's one of the most, I would say, that's one of the highlights in the archives. And we didn't have the original. And now so it's not only that we are now have the originals, we are now able to receive more originals that are now found in various places because they lost their way and also we created a little museum, an exhibition. So we have, I would say, every day we have hundreds of people visiting just to read the texts. It's very significant to see how these texts are still very relevant for so many Israelis, so many kinds of Israelis, and also from people outside of Israel.
So to the audience, the next time you visit Israel, please spend time in the Negev. People are coming down to the Negev because of what happened on October 7th. David Ben-Gurion used to say that the future of Israel would emerge from the Negev. And you can really begin to understand that when you spend time in the archives, Israel's presidential library. It would make a tremendous part of your next visit to Israel, and we're happy to arrange that. Let's go back for a moment to something that Adi mentioned in the video. He calls the current situation Israel's second war of independence. Would you agree with that comment?
I agree. I agree with that. I felt it from the beginning. I think I wasn't the only one. It felt, and I have to say, it still feels very existential. But I think I already mentioned in one of our previous talks that in some ways it was even worse. So it's the second war of independence in the sense that I absolutely agree with Adi that it's an existential event, and it's a test for Israel's resilience and ability to survive. But in some ways, there was something in this war that was even more challenging than the War of Independence. And the War of Independence, for those who don't have the background, one has to understand that there was the War of Independence, during the War of Independence, 1% of the Jewish community living in the land of Israel lost their life. So talking about percentages, we're talking about a horrific number. But there was something about that war that because of the preparations, because of the very high alert to the possibility of a total war, civilians were evacuated mostly on time. And here there was something about feeling too secure, I guess. There was a sense that I think Israeli society lost its alertness. And the result was horrific because it resembled more our memories from pre-independence. Pogroms, where Jews were civilians and, people who don't have means to defend themselves are left without defense. So that was a big trauma. The actions taken after that, yes, are very much War of Independence in the sense of absolute determination to overcome this, understanding that there's no such thing as not overcoming it, because there's not that option. That option means not to exist.
Thank you. We're getting a question from Phyllis White. She was just wanting to have a little more background on the conflict in 1956.
So it's one of those wars that Israel has been criticized for because Israel joined joint interests of Britain, Great Britain and France, and kind of joint opportunity that they had they had warfare interest in the region, and it joined the war with them. But the background was that Israel's own interest in this was that there were constant infiltrations into Israel's borders after the War of Independence. So the War of Independence did not end in peace, as we know. It ended in long-term agreements called the Armistice Agreements. And the result was that because there was no peace and there were these agreements, there was a constant violation of the borders of Israel that created the situation in which it was constantly infiltrated and there was insecurity on the borders. So there were
Gaza was technically part of Egypt between 48 and 67.
Yes, it was part of Egypt, and it was and when I'm using the term infiltrations, for the lack of another word, I'm referring to attacks on civilians that were taking place from the other side of the borders. So some of the events are more famous than others. Others have faded away with our memory because new horrific events took over. But at least in one occasion, there was a wedding going on in an immigrants village near the border, and it was attacked by terrorists, and the result was that people were killed in the midst of a wedding. And that I'm mentioning that as one out of various events that were taking place, and that illustrate the lack of security after 1949. Although the war officially ended, the Armistice Agreement signed, and the Armistice Agreement signed, still security was not in place. So that eventually deteriorated until there was a decision of Israel to go to war against Egypt and try to put an end to that.
Thank you. So let's talk a little bit about your comment that you made actually last year at this time when you saw Ben-Gurion as a prophet and also as a therapist. Let's start with the prophet, Ben-Gurion the prophet. He knew this was a difficult neighborhood. The partition plan in 47 was something he agreed to. He understood that the cost of the War of Independence would be severe. Do you believe that he saw these kinds of conflicts
Ben-Gurion,
that they were going to happen into the future, and do they always have to happen? But let's start with the prophecy.
So talking about Ben-Gurion as a prophet, I always prefer talk about his positive vision of the future. So maybe I'll start with a negative vision of the future, so then I could also say a few words about the positive vision of the future. Because yes, he looked at the future. I think one of the things that characterized Ben-Gurion more than anything else was him being a chess player, right? He was the kind of person that saw, he calculated many moves ahead. In that sense, he was definitely brilliant in calculating moves ahead. There are many cases throughout history that we can actually show how we calculated things ahead. I guess one of the most famous or important occasions in which he calculated things ahead was in July 1945, when he realized that the big challenge that will define whether a Jewish state will be will be a reality, will be realized or not, depends on the preparation for war against the Arab states that will be established. In 1945, not even all of them are established, and he's already preparing. He started the first steps of building the IDF in July 1945. Maybe some Americans know that it actually happened in New York, in the house of Rudolf Sonneborn. So it happened at your end of the world, because he knew he can receive help from some prominent Jewish leaders in the US that will help him create the infrastructure for a future army. Now, when Ben-Gurion talks about an army and I would say a war in those times, people look at him as if he's, I would say, hallucinating. There's even a famous quote by Weizmann that I found recently. It's not an exact quote, but something that goes like this: whether there will be an army or not be an army, a state will happen. Something like that. Now, it's not the exact quote, but that's the meaning of it. In other words, he was out of the box when he thought that eventually the state will depend on the Jewish people being able to defend themselves. And in that sense, he was prophesizing. He was looking to the future. Prophesizing is, maybe we should say he was a good chess player.
He was clear on this point. I mean, he said that the fate of Israel really would depend on two things: its strength. Without the defense forces, there's no way to defend the country, but also on its righteousness, its role as Or L'Goyim.
Right. So I'll get to the righteousness. I'll get to the righteousness and to the, I would say, to the constructive, positive parts of the vision. But I do want to add that in the 1950s, when he's not only the prime minister, but he's also the minister of defense, he, in every talk that he gives to the army, and I really went through all of them. I mean, I'm talking about open talks, okay? I went through his speeches, the speeches that he gave to the high command of the army from 1949 till 1968, pretty much, okay? I went all the way. And one of the things that struck me was that he constantly warned from leaning back. Okay, he constantly warned from feeling too secure. So in that sense, I also felt when I read those things, I felt that he had this I would say sober approach to life, and didn't tell himself stories that now we're fine, now we're strong, we can lean back. No, he thought alertness has to be part and parcel of the state of mind, of the Israeli state of mind. So that was, I would say, that's one part of it. The other part of it is, as you rightly said, is that he was not willing to lean only on that. And in the midst of, I would say, the worst situations from the security point of view, he never looked only at arms and army as the basis of our existence. He always made sure to remind us, them and us, that we will exist and survive and thrive if we continue challenging our own abilities. And I would say that looking at Ben-Gurion in 56 talking about solar energy and desalination of water, I mean, really, who talked about those things in 1956? Well, he did. He didn't only talk about that, he actually marked it as a must. Dealing with energies, finding new resources for energies, and at the same time, these two sources of energy had to do with the Negev. I'm looking at the Negev.
He talked about it in the epilogue movie, the documentary film I love so much. He talks about that the true heroes of Israel aren't the politicians or the military generals. It's the water scientists that can make the desert bloom. And that's also what we do at Stebo Care, the Blaustein Institutes for Desert Research and Zuckerberg Institute for Water Research, and amazing what people today call climate technology. As you know, a couple of years ago, BGU professor Daniel Shamovitz introduced BGU's Israel's first and still largest BGU's School of Sustainability and Climate Change that carries this Sonnenfeld and Goldman name. So Amazing, amazing work. I want you to talk a little bit about him as a prophet from the positive standpoint, the inspirational role.
So first of all, he never missed an opportunity to remind his listeners that that we have it's first of all, it's on our it is our responsibility to, and our ability. And when I say our, I mean, he looked at Israeli civilians, Israeli citizens, whether they were young or older, whether they were women or men, whether they were newcomers or old-timers, and also Jews or Arabs. And he mentioned that time and again. He looked at Israeli civilians and said, we have to overcome, we can and we have to maximize our abilities as human beings. So he believed, he was a true believer in humans' abilities and in humans' capabilities to create change and overcome almost anything. So first of all, he had a true, I would say, faith in humankind. And yes, and it also came alongside with a reminder that in order to achieve that, it's not enough to be smart and imaginative and creative. All of this is very important, but part and parcel, it goes alongside with being, I would say, aware of our, I would say, mutual respect as human beings. So he did mention that, and when he talked about mutual respect as human beings, he definitely mentioned Jews and Arabs in Israel. He always made sure to mention that. Now, that doesn't mean that things were ideal during his times. Of course, far from that. And he himself has had the responsibility as a politician of not, let's say, one cannot say that Israel was treating all its citizens in an equal way or giving all its citizens equal opportunities. But at least in the way he used the words, okay, and in the reminders that he gave in speeches, yes, he used to remind his listeners that it's up to them to make life a better place and to make Israel a thriving society. Up to them. That's basics of Zionism. I don't think Ben-Gurion was unique in that. I think Herzl came before him in putting those things in nice words. Im tirtzu en zo agada.
So we're getting a lot of questions. So I want to get a couple of these questions out to you, and believe it or not, our hour is almost wrapping up. Mark Baker's asking about Israel as an exemplary society, which is something that Ben-Gurion talked about. Is your view, or do you believe his view would be today, that that's still something that can be pursued, or is it not really realistic given the challenges of the neighborhood?
The question is, what are the ingredients that you include in the exemplary, right? So if the ingredients are achievements and overcoming difficulties and solidarity in times of difficulties, I think we're doing well. I think our scores are high. But if exemplary means living in peace with our neighbors, we're scoring very, very low. And if exemplary means not to live on one's sword, then we're far from that, very, very far from that. And even if exemplary means internal relations between groups that belong to different cultures, I think Israel should learn from other countries. I think Canada is doing better, I have to say, did better in understanding that people come with different cultures and one should respect that and find a way to create a common denominator without erasing those cultures. Now I know that Canada has its own issues and America and Europe and everything. I'm just saying that it seems to me that Israel, it doesn't seem to me, I mean, that according to Ben-Gurion, because he's in the center stage of what we're talking today, Ben-Gurion talked about the term mizug galuyot, which is the Israeli, I would say Ben-Gurion's version of the melting pot, okay? Mizug galuyot means the integration of exiles. And while talking about mizug galuyot, he meant to take all these different groups who are all Jewish, he was talking about the Jewish majority here, and merge them together. But in fact, it didn't really happen. What happened was that there was a dominant European-based group that expected all the others to merge into it and accept its dominant culture. So I think that Ben-Gurion himself was, first of all, he was the product of his time in not realizing that some cultures patronize others and it's not okay. And I also think that he was, I don't believe I'm saying it, but I will. I think he was naive in thinking that we can all just take off the identities that we were equipped with for so many generations, just take them off and become regular Israelis. And in some of his texts, you see that. And so he missed, in that part, Israel is not exemplary society. According to Ben-Gurion, is not an exemplary society.
That brings me a little bit to a question that's coming up from somebody you know, Ernie Simon, one of our board members and great supporters. He's asking you just to comment a little bit on the nature of democracy in Israel. You know, even the term democracy and Jewish state, sometimes, how do those two things work together?
I think that I would like to disconnect my answer from what is happening today, because I don't think that I have the tools to analyze what is happening today from Ben-Gurion's perspective. And that is because when Ben-Gurion was talking about training Israelis to become citizens of a sovereign state, he was aware that it's a challenge. I mean, you bring people who are mostly never had the opportunity to be citizens of the countries where they lived in, and now you're telling them you have your own state and you have to run it and go ahead. Here's democratic rules. Go and function within those. So within those rules of the game, and Ben-Gurion was concerned that that many of the new Israelis or many of these new citizens, I'm not talking only about the immigrants, anyone who was living in the country in May 48 now became a citizen, right? So now we have the right to vote and the right to be elected, and then we have the right of speech, free speech, freedom of speech, and mostly we have the responsibility of being tolerant to others. And Ben-Gurion was concerned that those things were not deeply rooted in Jewish culture because of the generations of living under either non-democratic regimes or under regimes that did not give the Jewish minority equal rights. So he was concerned about that. And that's why he coined the term mamlachtiyut. Mamlachtiyut is mostly now, it was coined by Avi Bareli and Nir Kedar, my two colleagues, was coined as Israeli republicanism, which I really like. And basically it says, let's make sure that people understand that the state is the source of authority and power, but also that we as citizens have a responsibility to function within that state and to be active in its public realm. Now, these things, when Ben-Gurion was talking about them, had nothing to do with, let's say, were not connected with today's dispute, which is the relations between the arms of governance. They had to do with the fact that people had other loyalties to political parties, to different identities. So I would say that Israel has been dealing with those challenges from the beginning, and maybe looking at it from that perspective gives us an understanding that we're yet on another phase, or it's another cornerstone in the process of understanding what the Jewish democracy means, and not necessarily looking at it as the end of the world, but as a journey of understanding what it means to have a Jewish sovereignty, which is, yes, it is challenging, but it doesn't mean it's impossible, and it definitely is possible if you look at the Jewish state as yet another nation state, like the Greek one and the Swedish one and the German one and the French one.
Thank you, Paul, for that answer, and thank you, Ernie, for that question. It's a really good one. We're going to have to wrap up the program. We're getting lots of questions now. We're not going to be able to get them all answered. But Brian Fischbach from the Jewish Journal of Greater Los Angeles is asking, could you compare Ben-Gurion at all to any U.S. political figures? Is he a combination of George Washington and Abraham Lincoln, or do any come to mind?
I don't pretend to be an expert in American history, but my American friends mostly mentioned to me the fact that Lincoln is I would say was a leader that, in a way, if I have to use, I'm going back to that term of Ben-Gurion mamlachtiyut. It seems to me that Lincoln did have mamlachtiyut. In other words, he did that goal of his to create a clear understanding amongst different Americans that they share this thing and they have to do it together. So that's something that it might be.
I know that Ben-Gurion must have found some inspiration from Lincoln, because when you visit his desert home in the kibbutz at Sde Boker, he has three figures of people that he looked up to. One is Moses, one is Mahatma Gandhi, and one is Lincoln.
Yes, and the interesting thing is that Lincoln, we Israelis, we have a hard time to say that word, right? Lincoln.
You say it well. Lincoln.
Lincoln
like
is his figures hanged in his living room.
Yep.
Just near the map of Israel. So I find it very, I would say, symbolic.
I do too.
And we know that Ben-Gurion, we know that he received many presents throughout his life, and some of the stuff that he received, he has them in his house in Tel Aviv. So the things, the statues or the pictures or the things, the items that he chose to take out of the box and bring all the way to Sde Boker are things that were meaningful to him. And I absolutely agree that the fact that Moses and Gandhi and Lincoln are there, it's no coincidence.
Yeah.
They're there. Maybe we should add that also Buddha is there, which I think is really interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, you've commented before about the triangulation of where Ben-Gurion's ideology comes from, sort of Eastern thought and the Bible, but also a lot of Western studying that he all did on his own.
Yeah, that's something that he was very clear about. And well, the parts that have to do none of them is taken for granted, right? I mean, when we think of him as a modern national leader, and we know he was secular in his daily life, in his habits. So he did not live at all like an observant Jew. We even know that they added the mezuzah only when a big rabbi was supposed to come and visit him. So he did not pay attention to the I would say to the traditional lifestyle. He married in the municipality. I mean, there are all kinds of examples for that. Still, he was he was very knowledgeable. The Bible was, I would say, a very significant part of his toolkit. And he quoted from the Bible, and he leaned on the Bible, and he simply considered the Bible as the, I would say, as the proof, or the anchor of our right to be here. So that's the Jewish side, was very strong. Even I found people like to say that he was secular and a non-believer, and I even found a quote where he says, he writes in his own words, he says that he does believe in God. So if one wants to argue with me, I can send that quote as well. So that's his Jewish part. It's very, very clear. He's not denying it at all. And of course, as a modern, as a result of his time, he was a modern leader. It's not surprising that he leaned on the classics, right, of modernity, the ancient ancient Greek philosophers that were, he considered them as the foundations of modern thinking, universal thinking, the reason, right? The ideas of reason and of mankind. Okay, that's also, I would say, not surprising. The third part is surprising, right? The third part is surprising because it was not very common at the time to be so attracted by the non-Western cultures and philosophies. And we have enough signs for that in his writings and in his desert home. But I happened to be last week in Tel Aviv. I was asked to give a talk there and in his library. And I haven't been there for a long while. And while I was waiting for my talk to begin, I was walking around and I found so many statues of Buddha in his desk. And I thought to myself, it's actually there. There's something about those ancient philosophies that he was attracted to, which I don't have enough tools to provide explanation. I have a student who is now trying to understand it and writing a research about it, but it is fascinating.
It's a webinar topic for another day.
I agree, and I hope we can do it with some of the international students who come from those cultures, and that will provide us, they will shed additional light on the possible explanations for that. But clearly he was an open-minded person that believed in the responsibility of learning and developing human's mind all the time to be able to look at the world from a bigger perspective.
We're going to need to wrap up. I want you to close with maybe one comment about Ben-Gurion as a therapist.
First of all, I love to, the place that I love to be more than any other place, I mean, outside of my home and my family and my granddaughter, of course. So the place, the other place is the archives. The archives are full of wisdoms and are full of examples of difficulties that we overcame. So I can say that when I have been studying Ben-Gurion most of my grown-up life, since I was a young student, and I was recruited by Meir Avizor, Professor Meir Avizor, in the 80s, believe it or not, to be part of his students' team in the editorial board of Ben-Gurion's papers. And I was fascinated by his writings already then. And since then, I've been going back to his writings all the time. But when in difficult times, when we think that nothing was as bad as this, and we go to Ben-Gurion's writings and how he deals with those difficult times, and I'm talking about difficult times, just look at his diary, what he writes after, in 45, when the numbers of the people that died in the Holocaust, the numbers are pouring in, and he looks at it and he makes the calculation. And you look at his approach, he looks at the reality and he does not turn his face. He looks at it in the face and he says, okay, and now this is what we should do. And yes, and he's my therapist. I remind myself to look at reality, not to turn my face. It's sometimes really hard. And I tell myself, okay, let's see what we can do. Now, we're not Ben-Gurions, right? We're just simple people, but every person can do something. And we do whatever we can. And I think many Israelis are like that. And I
Thank
think
you.
that's very important.
Thank you. I think you're serving a little bit as my therapist and the audiences also today. So we really appreciate it. So I just want to thank Professor Paula Caballo for spending this last hour with us, and also Dr. Adi Portuguese for his great work curating the Ben-Gurion archives and the beautiful new building. Please come visit. For those of you who enjoyed the program, we've got another one coming up very soon in Los Angeles. We have a program called From the Negev to the World, where we will be giving Professor Vladimir Zelman of USC an honorary doctorate. Both Professor Daniel Shamovitz, the university president, and Chaim Hames, the rector, will be in attendance. If you are in the LA region, you can just click on that QR code to register or go to our website to find out more information. It is December 11th, this coming week. Also, we greatly appreciate you attending today. If you're interested in supporting our ongoing work, a very good way to do that is to give to the Ben-Gurion Annual Fund, where the dollars are needed most. And here's another QR code. I love all this technology that you could click on to make a small donation. We really appreciate you being here today. David Ben-Gurion said lots of things. We talked about them today. One of his favorite quotes of mine is that in Israel, in order to be a realist, one has to believe in miracles. And in thinking about the situation we find ourselves in, 14 months and a day after October 7th, let's believe in the miracle that the hostages will be returned safely. Let's believe in the miracle that this conflict can come to a close and that we can be compassionate for the lives lost on both sides and move toward a world and a place of peace and prosperity. We also are not far from Hanukkah, just a few weeks away. That's the holiday that celebrates the lights of freedom, of Israel, of the Jewish world, surviving and thriving into the future. So let's celebrate this year with your family and have the lights of Hanukkah mean even more than maybe they have in years before. Thank you so much for joining us. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.